Hello and welcome to another one of my thoughts videos. I have another spare few minutes while packing suitcases, so I thought I would just sit down and share a little bit of the thoughts that that have been going through my head over the last few days. I've been wondering how is it that we have got to where we are with such broken science, well, supposed science. They say it's science, but it's entirely broken. And as I've pointed out in different videos previously, it's amazing how wrong a lot of the mainstream science has been over the last 100 to 150 years. And I was pondering on how, apart from what I've explained in other ways, the mechanics of it, how is it in a more general, conceptual way as to how we got this to where we are. As I've said with germ theory and viruses and all of that, how we went off the tracks at different times and made some very wrong assumptions and conclusions that then laid poor or wrong foundations for further errors and greater errors. I'm now coming to also suspect genetics as well as not necessarily being bogus, but being extremely skewed and not trustworthy at all. And there's a number of other areas as well. So how did we get into this? And I read a paper, one of those scientific papers that wasn't aimed at this but gave me some insight, and it was about the scientific research universities. Now you have to go back 150 odd years to, once again, a lot of these things that have been happening have been in the last 100 to 150 years, and that's where we've had amazing progress in some areas but amazing blunders in others, and a lot of it seems very controlled and very directed throughout the last 100 to 150 years. Now, as I've explained, it has a basis in the industrial revolutions of 150 years or so ago, and as the English Empire started to degrade and the American Empire started to build, that is where a lot of these things with corporations and wealth transference and the scientific and educational area is linked into that, because the business side of things tended to direct what was happening in the industrial, so and therefore the educational and the monetary, and it's all sort of linked in the big matrix of things. Now those 150 years back, they started to reform or build the education system. The education system as we have it today is actually very young in compared to the overall history of mankind, and it has been extremely engineered. The whole aim of the education system was to create workers adequately equipped for the industry of the Industrial Revolution, particularly in America, but also England and all around the planet as well. And that is, we'll probably call for specific videos on particularly that. I got into homeschooling, just to let you know that. I have 5 children, and we homeschooled all of them, not because we thought it was a great idea or anything. It's because my first son was born with deformed feet, and they were upside down and they had to be put up the right way with surgeries, and so he was not able to go to school at 5 and then at 6, and his sister also wouldn't be left behind, and so we started teaching them at home just to make sure he didn't fall behind in his or in their education when they actually got going to school. Then we started to meet a whole bunch of other people who were also homeschooling, and we got more and more into it, and I thought, oh, this is a decent alternative. But I did consider that we were going to send our kids to school. Eventually we didn't send them to school, and we found that the homeschooling was a better option. But I never actually discarded the education system, thinking, oh yeah, I survived, I got through it, and we need to send our children to school. And I did consider it was a plan B option eventually, but it was still okay and adequate. But as years went on, and after we got all 5 of our children, we did send 2 of our children to school for 3 weeks once, and it was just abominable. It was absolutely terrible. In 3 weeks, the deterioration in their learning and their discipline and everything, just in 3 short weeks, was shocking to us, and we decided we were going to continually send them to not send them to school and do homeschooling. Then eventually I found out a lot more about the history and the reasons behind the education system, and I found out more about the matrix program that it is. And these days we often think, well, the education system is broken, it's not working because children aren't learning to read and write and all those sorts of things. But in actual fact, it's working to perfection, because it's achieving the exact goals that the education system was set up to do in the first place. That is, to dumb everybody down and train people to slot into job positions in the industrial complex, as it were. And the systems of IQ tests to test people was not to test their intelligence, it was to test their conformity ability and their ability to fit, and where they fitted into the great mass of people as a general conformity thing, to find out where you would be best slotted into the matrix machine to make the money that the elites and those that govern the corporations are going to make. Now, the education system, what has it got to do with the science that we have? Well, the scientists of the past, way back, Isaac Newton and all these guys, they observed as they saw fit. People like Leonardo da Vinci were employed by the military, so many of his inventions were militarily oriented, like helicopters and guns and rockets and all sorts of things that he conceptually invented because he worked for the military. The same goes for today. Most of the innovations comes from a desire from either the military or the industrial complex, applying the proper concepts and investigation into developing their products. Everything else is kept status quo. And how does that happen? The education system is made so that it will keep people in their little slot in society and not improve. In the United States, along with the Industrial Revolution, the universities that became an extension of the first primary schools, then the secondary schools, and then to universities, the universities started to take on the scientific investigation as well, so that would help. And at least 100 to 150 years ago, most of any funding by any university was done by industry and the military, so that they would use the bodies that were wanting something to do in the universities to do the research, the donkey work as it were, to find out the information that they needed to improve their military machine or their industrial complex. Now, as time went on over the last 100 years, those universities have become the major area of scientific research. Now, I don't want to offend any of you who have university qualifications or even work in universities or are studying in universities, because you are, in a way, a little bit of a victim of the system. Now, everybody is valuable. Everybody has some level of intelligence and aptitudes and abilities that we all benefit from. And the people in the system of the education system have particular aptitudes. Remember, the IQ tests were to figure out where you fit on the scale of conformity. Now, if you are an average person with averagely good talents and ability, then you'll fit somewhere in the middle and you will be fine and you'll have a job and all the rest of it. Now, the education system at the lower end, the people who are less capable in many respects get the more menial jobs and things, and the ones who are a little bit strange at the top end with high IQs means both extremes are non-conformity to the major block of the society. So the major block of society can do the major block of the work. The ones that are at the top end with high IQs are ones that think most like those that set the exam. They are the top end. They are the most able to think exactly like those that ask the questions. It is no indication of intelligence. You may be down at the bottom end or even the middle and be extremely intelligent, but because the way the exams are made, you will conform as being an average conformist. Now, the education system is made to train those major average conformists for average conformist jobs. And so the system itself needs people to run it, and there's a certain segment of that conformity that are particularly suited to running the system. They don't ask questions about it, they know how to answer in a way that the system requires, and they are very system-oriented people. Now, that doesn't have to be that way, it's just that if you're in that system, you have shown that you have the ability to conform to that system with the abilities you have. Instead of thinking laterally, thinking outside of things, thinking conceptually and Legoing concepts together and all of that sort of thing, you are able to conform to the machine and do well in that machine. Now, the trouble with being a conformist to that machine is that you run like a cog in a machine and don't do much in the way of lateral thinking and jumping from one subject to another, mixing subjects and mixing and matching concepts. You do it as the system requires. Now, that in the long run is not very creative. And so when you hand scientific research projects to a system of conformists, and don't get offended if I say a bunch of robots, because that's what you are fulfilling, a robotic conformist role within that machine so that you can get your job, your wage, and therefore survive. So it's not your fault, really. It's the system's fault that is generating conformist robots to follow a system. Now, the ones that finance the system are the ones that are interested in, now, how are we going to use the system? And you are the cannon fodder, as it were, or the robots that are going to do the work for them. The military or industry or whatever has an idea of what to do, and they then will finance research that is in line with what they want to find out. They then have these people who've conformists who come through the system and get to the top end of the system and become the resident professors and the research, what do you call those, the ones that run the research and come up with the projects, and then they use the cannon fodder of student robot conformists to do the donkey work of doing the research. crunching the numbers, sitting down and observing and writing notes and all those sorts of robotic things to then further the research project. Now, unfortunately, when you have a conformist robot running a conformist robot system for an industrial or a military machine, you're not going to have very creative and thoughtful thinking. And they are not necessarily going to be so onto it that they're going to spot deficiencies. When you can have a new conformist that comes into the system, shows that they conform well by being able to pass exams, not necessarily being intelligent, but being able to pass exams, so that it shows that they are a good conformist, then they go on to do the donkey work. Now, they are taught a whole set of rules and information that is considered to be true, and they will not even question it, like viruses exist. Yes, they're particles and stuff, which is a load of rot, but they believe it because the system has told them, and they're good little conformists and robotically accept it, process it, and slot into the system, into their position in society. Now, if they're in they grow through the education system, they prove that they are a good robot for the system, and they get up to the top into research. And so the trouble with the science today is that we have a bunch of not greatly intelligent people, although they will be publicized as, oh wow, Professor such and such, with all sorts of letters after their name, which is no real indication of their ability to think outside the box and come up with new ideas, to question, to validate, and really observe nature as science really is. Science is actually observation, to then discover these concepts that repeat every time it's applied. Then you note it down and say, here is a scientific discovery that something happens, like gravity falls. They haven't even figured out what gravity is, but they know it works. Those sorts of things. But when you're in a systematized university research situation, you have a whole 150 years worth of systematic selection of conformist robots who then act on sometimes erroneous foundations to spit out robotic answers. Now, to reinforce this, we have peer reviews, and that is where it's a democratic, what they think is a double check to make sure that the information is correct. It's just a validation from the same robotic conformist process. And anybody that comes up with something new is immediately shot down by the crowd. When someone comes up with an actual true finding that doesn't fit the shaky foundational research, then if there are enough robots to agree, the error can be validated and accepted. And if it doesn't agree with the majority of the robots, it is discarded, even if it's true. So you have a number of things conspiring against the scientific process. One is that you have a system of university conformists that are not necessarily so creative, although some may be, but it's systematized, and they will only get funding and support from the industrialists and the military who are interested in the research they're doing. So anybody that has an idea or a desire to research something different they won't get the funding for it. So the results are necessarily going to be biased and skewed and mediocre. And the peer reviewing of the studies and the research guarantees that it's going to conform once again. Even if it's true or untrue, it's going to go with the popular opinion, not necessarily what is actually true. So you get all of the research that, for example, if there is a research project that wants to point out that the first yellow fever vaccines were absolutely bogus, because we now know that heating particles, exosome particles, destroys them. So if someone wants to point that out, they'll be shot down by their peers and defunded. So that error will stay cemented into the scientific body of errors. Now, that's not to say that we don't get a lot right. Absolutely we do. For example, a cell phone functions because of the research carried out not only by the industry, but those also employed by research universities on a number of those things. Because those industries, like a cell phone or computers, were in the, in the desires of industry, so they were funded and reasonable research done. So I'm not saying that all research is bad. I'm not saying that all research universities is wrong either. But when I see a new piece of supposed scientific research and opinion, for example, the recommendations for the quarantining that we went through, if it's got conducted by Harvard University, Stanford, or whoever or whatever university, I immediately suspect it. It's immediately suspect because of all the aforementioned factors, and then you have to look at it a lot more critically, applying the concepts that you already know of. So the education system is helped for science to be skewed, and we need to be really onto it to make sure that we understand foundational concepts first and foremost and Lego them together, cross-disciplinary, and also applying your creative mind to it. So there we go. Those are my thoughts of the last week or so.